In the ADX Florence prison, some of the most dangerous human beings exist that have caused havoc in the world and mostly in the United States of America. These individuals have risen to the top of dope trafficking rings and have impacted elections and also court cases with bribery, threats, and assassinations. Because when the law comes for them, it's like they forgot their crimes. Today, we will take a deeper look into some of the most dangerous drug kingpins that were in or still is locked up in the ADX Florence prisons. These are their stories. Number 7. James Sweeney. James Sweeney, age 36, of Baltimore, Maryland, was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to participate in a violent racketeering enterprise known as the Dead Man Incorporated. Sweeney was a founder of DMI and became its Supreme D. The sentence was imposed on February 25, 2013, by a U.S. district judge in the Eastern District of Texas. Sweeney is currently serving a 30-year sentence for a 1996 second-degree massacre conviction. As part of his Maryland plea agreement, at the conclusion of the sentencing, federal prosecutors in Texas dismissed an indictment charging Sweeney with the assassination of an inmate at the federal prison in Beaumont, Texas. According to his plea agreement, in 2000, Sweeney was a founding member of DMI, created originally as a prison gang in Maryland. By 2006, DMI expanded its membership by recruiting members outside prison, including women. Sweeney admitted that prior to his transfer to federal custody, he was incarcerated in state prison facilities in Maryland and oversaw the activities of DMI. To make money for the gang and to enable white prisoners to retaliate against black gangs and cliques, Sweeney announced that DMI was available to do hits for hire. Sweeney participated in the smuggling of narcotics into prisons by and on behalf of DMI members, including heroin, powder and crack coke, marijuana, and prescription drugs. During his years in prison in Maryland and in the federal system, Sweeney ordered numerous hits in furtherance of DMI, as well as assaults. Number 6. Alpo Martinez. Alberto Guedes. Martinez, better known as Alpo Martinez, born on June 8th, was an American drug dealer from Harlem, New York City. He rose to prominence in the mid-1980s. In addition to New York, Martinez expanded his drug trade to other cities, notably Washington, D.C. Martinez started selling narcotics at 13 years old in East Harlem. In 1985, he met West Side Harlem dope dealer Ozzie Faison. Martinez started to move up the chain of drug dealers in Harlem and eventually became one of the biggest dope dealers in the city. Martinez later moved to Washington, D.C. to expand operations, where he quickly became involved in the city's underworld and elevated his dope activities. He met Wayne "Silk" Perry, a notorious gangster and D.C. enforcer who would later become his bodyguard and hitman. On November 7, 1991, Martinez was arrested in Washington, D.C. for selling dope. He was charged with conspiracy to commit assassination, various dope charges, and 14 counts of assassination, including the manslaughter of former friend and dope dealing partner Rich Porter, D.C. dope dealer Michael Anthony Salters, a.k.a. Frey, and Brooklyn dope dealer Demencio Benson. Facing the possibility of either the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Martinez turned informant and testified against members of his organization. For his testimony against Perry, Martinez was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Martinez was released in 2015 while serving a 25-year sentence for 14 counts of execution at ADX Florence, a federal supermax prison located in Fremont County, Colorado. He was released after testifying against former associates and had been living under a United States Witness Protection Program in Lewiston, Maine, under the assumed name Abraham G. Rodriguez, until shortly before his death in 2021. Number 5. Howard Papy Mason. Howard Papy Mason was a soldier. In one of the most violent eras in New York City history, Papy Mason rose above the rest to cement his reputation as one of the most feared men in the 5 boroughs. When the South Jamaica crack wars were in full swing and bodies were dropping by the day, Papy held court in the street and reigned king. He was the one nobody wanted to play with. He was the baddest man on the block. To put it quite simply, Papy Mason was a legend in his own time. In the mid-'80s, the crack vial spawned violence and bloodshed, paper chasers and four-corner hustlers, dope empires, and kingpin galore. And in the annals of mythical drug lore, Papy Mason stood tall over time as the man, the myth, and the folk hero that inspired Jay-Z, Nas, and 50 Cent to lionize him and his exploits in verse. Mason and his partner, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, ran a drug smuggling gang called the Bebos in the Jamaica, Queens neighborhood of New York City. The gang sold dope and netted as much as $200,000 per month in profit. Mason is serving a life sentence in federal prison. From behind bars on gun charges, Mason ordered the 1988 assassination of a police officer, Edward Byrne, which led to increased law enforcement attention and Mason's eventual arrest and conviction on various charges. A month after the killing, Mason was sentenced to 7 years in prison on gun charges. The federal government continued to investigate Mason for the Byrne killing. On December 11, 1989, Mason was convicted on federal charges including the murder of Officer Byrne. After 4 years of legal wrangling, including questions of Mason's mental competency, he was given a life sentence in 1994. Mason began serving his life sentence at ADX Florence Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado, and was subsequently transferred around 2015 to USP Allenwood. Number 4. Kenneth Supreme McGriff. Kenneth Supreme McGriff, born on September 19, 1959, is an American former dope lord from New York City who founded the organized crime syndicate, the Supreme Team. In 2001, he was convicted of execution, conspiracy, and drug trafficking, and sentenced to life in prison. McGriff rose to prominence in early 1981 when he formed his own crack coke distribution and manufacturing organization, which he called the Supreme Team, based in the Baisley Park houses in the South Jamaica section of the Queensboro of New York City, New York. Under McGriff's leadership, the gang's numbers swelled to over 100 members, with more $200,000 daily sold worth of crack coke at the 1987 peak, and came to control the crack coke trade in Baisley Park, the neighborhood where McGriff was raised. In 1987, McGriff was arrested following a joint state and federal investigation, and in 1989 pleaded guilty to engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise. He was sentenced to 12 years, incarceration, and convicted for federal narcotics conspiracy charges. McGriff was released from prison on parole in 1995. After being released from prison on parole in 1995, McGriff tried his hand at cinematography, seeking help in 1995 from Irv Gotti to film a movie based on the Kenyatta series novel Crime Partners. He was sent back to prison on parole violations by year's end and served another 2.5 years before being released in 1997. From 1997 to 2003, McGriff's criminal organization expanded into wholesale heroin and coke into Maryland and North Carolina. They distributed over 30 kilograms of heroin, 150 kilograms of coke, and 1.5 kilograms of coke base. In July 2001, McGriff was arrested after police pulled over a white BMW near 145th Street in Harlem and found a loaded weapon and nearly $11,000 in cash in his vehicle. Months before the investigation on Irv Gotti was launched, McGriff pleaded guilty to gun possession in September 2002. In 2003, McGriff was jailed in Baltimore for having violated a parole violation for shooting guns at a firing range and faced a sentencing on a state charge for criminal possession of a weapon with intent to use. He served a 37-month sentence. McGriff faced accusations of dope trafficking, while others with Murder, Inc. were indicted on money laundering and conspiracy to commit money laundering charges. The trial ended in December 2005. On February 1, 2007, McGriff was convicted of manslaughter for hire at a federal court in the Eastern District of New York. McGriff began serving a life sentence for his crimes at ADX Florence. As of 2025, he is housed at USP Beaumont in Jefferson County, Texas. Number 3. Juan Garcia Abrego. Juan Garcia Abrego, born on September 13, 1944, is a Mexican convicted drug lord and former top leader of the Gulf Cartel, a criminal group based in the state of Tamaulipas, Mexico. He started in the cartel under the tutelage of his uncle, Juan Nepomuceno Guerra. Reports date his trafficking career beginning in the mid-1970s, exporting marijuana from Mexico into the U.S. states of Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. In the early 1980s, he began incorporating coke into the cartel's trafficking operations. Garcia Abrego is widely known for innovating Mexican trafficking operations, turning them from smugglers into suppliers. By renegotiating deals with the Cali cartel, Garcia Abrego was able to secure 50% of every shipment out of Colombia as payment for delivery, instead of the $1,500 per kilo they were previously receiving. The renegotiating, however, brought a price. The cartel would have to guarantee any shipment from Colombia to its destination. This change forced Garcia Abrego to begin stockpiling hundreds of tons of coke along Mexico's northern border in warehouses. However, this allowed him to set up his own distribution network and expand his political influence. By the end of the 1980s and into the early 1990s, it was estimated Garcia Abrego was smuggling over 300 metric tons per year across the Mexico-United States border. Once the cocaine crossed the border into the United States, it was believed to reach distribution networks across the country in cities such as San Antonio, Houston, and New York City, with smaller elements in Dallas, Chicago, New Orleans, Oklahoma City, California, and Arizona. In addition to transporting coke for the Cali cartel, it was believed the Garcia Abrego cartel would also ship large quantities of cash to be laundered. The United States Department of Justice would confiscate over $53 million between 1989 and 1993 that was being laundered through two corrupt American Express employees as proof of such large-scale operations. In 1994, the United States Drug Enforcement Administration believed Garcia Abrego was making as much as $10 billion per year in profit. The following years, Fortune magazine estimated the Garcia Abrego empire to be worth $15 billion. Garcia Abrego was also involved in providing protection to other cartels wishing to operate within corridors already claimed by his organization. In the mid-1980s, Carlos Resendez set up a meeting between Garcia Abrego and Gernando El Aguacate Martinez regarding permission for Martinez to move coke through Matamoros. Garcia Abrego permitted him to do so in exchange for $200,000 per airplane flying through the region. Garcia Abrego was apprehended on January 14, 1996, and Mexico received certification on March 1st. It is believed that on May 16, 1984, Garcia Abrego ordered a hit on rival trafficker Casimiro Espinosa. The assassination attempt failed, leaving Casimiro injured. The following day, gunmen shot their way into Raya Clinic, a private hospital, looking for Casimiro. In the 10-minute shootout that followed, 300 rounds were fired and multiple innocent people were slain. 2 years after the 1984 clinic shootout, Ernesto Flores, an editor for the Mexican daily newspaper El Popular, was executed. It is believed Garcia Abrego ordered the hit after being aggravated with their coverage of the cartel's deeds. Flores' car was sprayed with gunfire by gunmen waiting at the entrance to the newspaper's offices. Norma Morena, a reporter for the newspaper, was also slaughtered in the attack. In 1991, a principal member of the Gulf Cartel, Tomas Gringo Sanchez, ordered the executing of a Colombian drug trafficker in a prison in Matamoros. The killing was not authorized by Garcia Abrego, and a riot subsequently broke out, slaughtering 2 members of the Gulf Cartel who were also incarcerated there. Juan Garcia Abrego had grown to such lengths that he was placed on the FBI Top 10 Most Wanted list of 1995. He has the distinction of being the first drug trafficker to ever be placed on that list. He was arrested on a ranch outside of Monterey on January 14, 1996. He was quickly extradited to the United States, where he stood trial 8 months after his arrest. Garcia Abrego was convicted on 22 counts, including money laundering, drug trafficking, intent to distribute, and running an ongoing criminal enterprise. After a 4-week trial, a jury needed only 12 hours to convict Garcia Abrego on all charges. He was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms. Number 2. Salvador Magluta. Salvador Magluta was born in Cuba in 1954, and he was raised in Miami, Florida. Magluta and his friend Willie Falcon started off as pot pushers before dropping out of school, with Magluta serving as the brains of the operation and Falcon serving as the brawn. In 1979, he was caught in a governmental wiretap during Operation Video Canary, putting himself and Falcon on the police's radar. The 2 men were arrested and charged on state dope trafficking charges, and they were given a probationary sentence of 5 years and a sentence of 14 months in prison, only to get out of prison on bail while their case was kept on appeal for years. The 2 men went back to the streets to continue selling coke, effectively ignoring their sentences. They became successful moneymakers for Medellin cartel trafficker Jorge Valdez, taking advantage of America's insatiable demand for coke during the 1980s. In 1980, Valdez was arrested and sentenced to 25 to 10 years in prison. But while he was let out on bail, he left the handling of his operations to Magluta and Falcon, who met Valdez's contacts in California and the Medellin cartel. By 1981, the 2 men were major players in the Miami dope scene, and the mid-1980s saw them make tens of millions of dollars, using it to invest in properties, make their fathers presidents of construction companies, party at nightclubs like the Mutiny, and even support their old high school's basketball team. Because Magluta and Falcon were nonviolent dope dealers, they stayed under the radar as the FBI focused its efforts on taking down the violent Cuban and Colombian cartels as the Miami drug wars escalated in the mid-1980s. In 1984, the muchachos were rearrested under state trafficking charges, but they were released on bail under fake names. They repeatedly changed names and driver's licenses and skipped bail, enabling them to escape arrest in Los Angeles and return to Miami. However, a Los Angeles sheriff recognized them after seeing them boat race on ESPN, forcing the 2 men to keep a low profile by ceasing their races and renting new apartments by 1987. On 30 March 1988, Magluta was arrested by the FBI while buying a ledger at a store. While he produced a fake identification card, a former classmate turned detective identified him. Magluta offered to lead the FBI to a house with thousands of kilos of coke in exchange for his release, but the FBI declined his offer. He was jailed without bond, but he was let out of jail on April 4, 1988, after the paperwork at the jail was altered by a corrupt official to show that Magluta had already served 14 months in jail. He rented a Miami Beach apartment for $5,800 a month, as Willie lived in a mansion in Fort Lauderdale. And while Willie did not want to go to jail, Sal lived a daredevil lifestyle of continuing to appear in public while enjoying the cat-and-mouse game. In 1989, a grand jury investigated Juan Acosta, resulting in the 18 September 1989 assassination of Magluta's former lawyer-turned-witness, Juan Acosta, by a Colombian hitman. In 1991, the law cracked down on the cartel, arresting several of its lieutenants. Pedro Rosello, Willie Falcon's brother-in-law, was arrested and persuaded to cooperate against Magluta, informing the U.S. Marshals of Magluta's address on La Gorce Island. Magluta was arrested on 15 October 1991. He agreed to cooperate against Falcon, who was also arrested. Magluta and Falcon continued to run their operations from prison while hiring the best criminal defense lawyers and having their associates become paralegals or private investigators in order to gain daily visitation rights. His girlfriend, Marilyn Bonachea, even registered as a paralegal to bring him food, to serve as his paymaster, and even to make conjugal visits to his visitation room as bribed guards looked the other way. On 6 August 1992, Falcon's wife Alina was assassinated in a robbery in Coral Gables, demoralizing Magluta's partner, although his depressed mood never shook his loyalty to Magluta, even as he was offered plea deals. Valdez paid $1 million a month to judges and other officials in a bid to help the muchachos buy their way out of a prison sentence. At the same time, Magluta's defense team publicized the names of several expected witnesses, ostensibly with the goal of collecting information on them, but several of those witnesses were targeted for assassinations to prevent them from testifying, with hitmen using the publicized names as a hit list. In 1996, as jury deliberations took place, the muchachos' lawyers persuaded the jury that they could not trust the witnesses, as many of them had been forced to admit to perjury. The jury surprised the world by delivering not guilty verdicts on every charge, having been bribed by the muchachos, and Magluta was let out of jail, while Falcon remained imprisoned on an earlier drug charge. Magluta put up a bond of $400,000, wore an ankle bracelet, abided by a curfew, and remained under the supervision of a brother-in-law. However, Magluta continued to frequent nightclubs and rejected his girlfriend's advice to flee and Valdez's advice to give up his drugs to the FBI, growing overconfident after his victory against the government. The FBI launched Operation Recoil to investigate the muchachos' role in fixing the verdict, and they discovered that jury foreman Miguel Moya had suddenly started to live an extravagant lifestyle, despite making only $36,000 a year as an aircraft repairman. The FBI sent undercover agents to approach Moya and learn about his spending habits, but after Moya aggressively flirted with the female agents, they were forced to change tactics. Not long after, Moya made the mistake of demanding more money from Magluta, who decided to send a man to talk to him. The FBI got to Moya first, sending the hulking 390-pound FBI special agent Joaquin Jack Garcia to intimidate Moya while posing as one of Magluta's henchmen. On 19 August 1998, Moya was arrested after Garcia caught him in a wiretap admitting to taking part in jury tampering. But his case resulted in mistrial after he claimed that his wealth had come from laundering money for his cousin, a corrupt policeman. In 1999, however, a federal judge concluded that he had accepted $500,000 in bribes, and as Moya had refused to cooperate, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Marilyn Bonachea, Magluta's, was dismayed to see how Magluta had allowed for the lives of two young mothers on the jury to be ruined by bribing them and therefore causing their imprisonments, and she ultimately decided to help take down her boyfriend after she was pulled over by police while hiding Magluta's incriminating ledger in her trunk. Magluta decided to jump bail on a passport fraud case rather than face trial, fleeing in his vehicle. His girlfriend also went into hiding. Rather than flee to a non-extradition country such as Venezuela aboard his private jet, he stayed at the Ritz-Carlton in Palm Beach, arrogant in his ability to stay in the Miami area. Magluta wore a wig, hoping that it would conceal his identity, but he was rearrested and charged with bond jumping. He was sentenced to 9 years for passport fraud and bond jumping, keeping him in jail long enough for him to be re-indicted for serious crimes. On 19 August 1999, his case was retried after Bonachea revealed that Magluta had ordered lawyer Juan Acosta's assassination and those of several other government witnesses. However, Bonachea was discredited by Magluta's lawyers, who revealed that she only knew all the assassination details from the Miami Herald. In 2002, Magluta was found guilty of money laundering, while he was found not guilty for bribing jurors, money laundering, and the obstruction of justice, and he was sentenced to the maximum of 205 years in prison. Falcon responded by taking a plea deal and accepting 14 years in prison. Number 1. Juan Ramon. Juan Ramon Matta Ballesteros, born January 12, 1945, is a Honduran former major narcotics trafficker who has been credited with being one of the first to connect Mexican drug traffickers with the Colombian cocaine cartels. This connection paved the way for a major increase in the amount of cocaine smuggled into the United States during the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s. Matta was indicted for operating several major coke smuggling rings in United States in the early 1980s. He was also one of the narcotics traffickers accused of the kidnap and assassination of American DEA agent Enrique Camarena in 1985. In 1988, Matta was arrested at his Honduran residence in a controversial operation by the Honduran and American governments and taken to the United States, where he stood several trials for his drug smuggling activities and his part in the kidnap and assassination of Enrique Camarena. He was found guilty of dope smuggling and of participating in the kidnapping, but not the homicide, of Camarena. In 2017, his conviction in the Camarena kidnapping was overturned because of the flawed forensic evidence used in his trial. A new trial was ordered, but in 2018 prosecutors decided to drop the charges. In the early 1980s, Matta was involved with major coke smuggling operations. In 1984, he was indicted for his role in a Van Nuys smuggling ring. The discovery of the ring in 1981 resulted in the seizure of 114 pounds of coke and $1.9 million in cash. And based on ledgers found with the drugs, prosecutors later estimated that the ring had generated $73 million in just 9 months. In 1985, Matta was again indicted for his role in a major coke smuggling ring operating in Arizona and Southern California. The ring was discovered in 1984, resulting in the seizure of about a ton of coke and $7.8 million in cash. Soon after the February 1985 kidnap assassination of U.S. DEA agent Enrique Camarena, Matta was suspected of involvement, and he was later indicted for his part in the kidnapping. According to journalist Elaine Shannon, Matta was located in Mexico City several days after Camarena's kidnapping, but his arrest was delayed by Mexican authorities, and he managed to flee the country. U.S. law enforcement continued to track Matta, and in April 1985, they traced him to the Colombian city of Cartagena. At the DEA's request, Matta was arrested by the Colombian government. In March 1986, while extradition proceedings were still underway, Matta escaped from prison, according to some accounts, by bribing prison authorities. Later that year, Matta returned to his native country of Honduras. The Honduran Constitution prohibited the extradition of Honduran citizens, and for 2 years, Honduran authorities rejected U.S. requests to extradite Matta. Finally, in April 1988, Honduran police arrested Matta and put him on a plane to the Dominican Republic. The Dominican government then put him on a flight to Puerto Rico with United States Marshals, who arrested Matta when they reached United States territory. The day after Matta's extradition, 1,000 to 2,000 students from the National Autonomous University in Tegucigalpa marched on the U.S. Embassy to protest. During the protests, which lasted for 2 days, the embassy was set on fire, and 5 students were executed. Matta was later convicted for operating an importation and coke distribution ring into Van Nuys, California. Matta appealed his conviction several times. Finally, in 1995, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit found that the United States Supreme Court, in a 1992 ruling on another defendant in the same case, had upheld the prosecution of a fugitive who was brought to the United States by kidnapping rather than extradition. Matta also appealed on the grounds that he was beaten and burned with an electric stun gun while being transported to the United States. A federal judge in Los Angeles had previously found evidence for his claims inconclusive, and the Court of Appeals declined to overturn that ruling.